Ever see that movie Geostorm? You know, the one where they're controlling the weather with satellites? Crazy, right? Well, this week's deep dive might just make you wonder. We're looking at a declassified CIA report sent in by a listener from way back in 1963 about turning weather into a weapon.
Yeah, the idea's been kicking around a lot longer than people realize. Armies have always kind of, worked with whatever the elements throw at them. Desert warfare, fighting in blizzards, it's all different.
Right, makes sense.
But this CIA report, it's different. Admiral Raborn, the guy behind it, he's not talking about adapting to weather. He's talking about straight up control.
Okay, I'll admit, when I first saw this document, I thought, is this a joke? We're talking 1963 here, barely into the space age. And they're talking weaponized hurricanes. Like, what, were they going to nuke a tornado or something?
Well, some of the ideas do sound like they're straight out of a comic book, honestly. Steering hurricanes into enemy fleets, disrupting radio signals with artificial storms. There's even this mention of something called Project ETMOS.
Project ATMOS. Okay, now that sounds like a spy movie waiting to happen. Was that a real thing?
That's just it. We don't know for sure. The report mentions ATMOS, says it was about figuring out how to, and I quote, harness weather for military purposes, but the details are still classified.
So we've got secret projects, talk about controlling hurricanes. It's almost comical, but hold on a sec. Don't we already have some level of weather control? I mean, cloud seeding is a thing, right?
Yeah, cloud seeding does exist, but it's not quite the dramatic force they make it out to be in the movies.
Right.
Back in the 60s, they were experimenting with silver iodide, trying to make clouds form, hoping to get rain. The idea was to maybe, I don't know, slow down enemy troops, mess with their logistics.
Okay, so maybe not full-blown hurricane summoning yet. But still, even back then, the ethics of this whole thing. I mean, weather's unpredictable, right? What if they did steer a hurricane, but it went off course?
It's funny you should mention that, because Rayborn actually brings that up himself in the report. He uses that exact example, redirecting a hurricane to take out an enemy fleet, but he admits there's a risk. What if it hits the wrong target? You could end up causing mass destruction.
Yeah, and not just to whoever you're aiming at either. Talk about unintended consequences.
Exactly. And then there's the environmental impact to think about. Today, we worry about climate change, what we're doing to the planet unintentionally. Now imagine deliberately causing droughts or floods.
It'd be devastating. Okay, so maybe hurricanes are out. But this report also talks about messing with the ionosphere. Is that even a thing?
It is actually this layer of the atmosphere way up high, full of these charged particles, and it plays a huge role in how radio waves travel. We're talking potential communication blackouts.
So even back then, they were thinking about that. I mean, today, everything relies on satellites, clear communication. Take that away, and it'd be chaos. But what was it about this whole weather a weapon thing that appealed to Rayborn? Why even go there?
Think of it like this. He called it a force multiplier. Basically, if you could control the weather, you could achieve the same goals as a huge military operation, but maybe with fewer troops, fewer casualties on your side.
Interesting. So why risk a whole naval battle when you can just, what, try to whip up a hurricane at the right time and place? So
Exactly.
it'd be like having the secret weapon, one that nobody sees coming. Speaking of which, this report really gets into the whole fog of war idea, literally. Instead of just hoping for fog, you could, like, create it. Can you imagine being a soldier already on edge, and suddenly this thick fog rolls in, and you know the enemy did
It's
it?
the psychological effect of that.
Huge.
You're already dealing with the stress of combat, and then you throw in a raging storm or a fog so thick you can't see your hand in front of your face, and you know it's not natural.
Okay, now I'm getting chills, and not the good kind. This is some heavy stuff.
And it's not just about, fog on a battlefield. This fog of war idea, you could apply it in bigger ways, right? Imagine a drought, but it's not natural. It's engineered to cripple some countries' agriculture, or floods, timed perfectly to wipe out supply lines.
Wait, you're not saying someone could actually make a drought or a flood happen, are you? That's a whole other level.
Right now. Debatable.
Wow.
But could they nudge things along, make a bad situation worse, maybe steer a weather system just so? That might be on the table sooner than we think.
Okay, hold on. We're talking about a whole new type of warfare here. No bombs, no bullets, just, what, messing with the jet stream? It's almost too out there.
And that's what makes it so tricky. How do you prove it? Weather's always changing. Who's to say a hurricane wasn't always going to be that strong, that a drought wasn't just bad luck?
So we're not talking like giant tornadoes with made in insert country here stamped on the side.
Not yet, anyway. But think about it. A country hit with drought year after year, crops fail, Economy tanks, people are hurting. Easy to say it's just nature, even if someone's tech gave it a push.
Man, that's straight out of a spy novel, except instead of stealing nuclear launch codes, they're rigging the 5-day forecast for, like, world domination or something.
Right. And the implications are huge. Imagine a country able to just subtly tweak the weather on a global scale. They could control food, trade, even decide who wins wars without firing a shot.
Okay, this is getting a little too end of the world for me. But let's say, just for fun, someone did figure this out. Weaponized weather, the real deal. Worst case scenario, what happens?
Worst case, it becomes the weapon. A few powerful countries calling the shots, literally. Imagine nations held hostage by the threat of engineered natural disasters, unable to feed their people, protect themselves.
So it's not just about armies fighting anymore, it's whole populations held vulnerable to the weather.
Exactly. And that's why this is so important to talk about. We need rules, ethical guidelines, something before it's too late.
But how do you even police the weather? You can't exactly build a wall to stop a hurricane.
All right, that's the million-dollar question. Do we need new treaties, new tech to even see what's going on? This isn't an easy problem to solve.
Okay, gotta admit, this is a lot to take in. We've gone from cloud seeding in the 60s to, like, the potential end of the world as we know it, all because of a few pages from the CIA. So we went from cloud seeding to, like, the apocalypse, all thanks to this old CIA report. It really makes you think, what would Raborn say if he could see all this technology now?
Oh, man, I think you'd be blown away. And probably a little freaked out, honestly. Remember, back then, the internet was barely a thing. Now you've got AI analyzing weather patterns, supercomputers running simulations. We're talking tools that could actually make this stuff happen.
Yeah, the technology has come a long way. But it still comes back to, well, should we even try to control the weather? It feels almost, I don't know, sacrilegious or something. Playing God, maybe?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? Who gets to decide when it's okay to use this kind of power? And what happens when those decisions have, global consequences? It's not just about military strategy anymore. It's about ethics, politics. It's about everything.
It's like that saying, with great power
comes great responsibility.
Exactly. And the responsibility here is enormous. We're not just talking about winning a war. We're talking about controlling forces of nature on a planetary scale, potentially. It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It really is. It's kind of easier to imagine using weather as a weapon than to really think about, like, the downsides, or if it's even morally right to do it in the first place.
And that's why these conversations are so important. We can't wait until it's too late, until someone's already using this tech against us to start figuring out the rules. So what do we do? How do we make sure we don't end up in some crazy weather war in the future?
It might sound simplistic, but awareness is a big part of it. The more people who understand what this technology could do, the good and the bad, the more likely we are to, demand better, demand responsibility from the people in charge.
So, like, sound the alarm. Get everyone talking about this before it's too late.
I wouldn't say alarm necessarily, more like engagement. We need scientists, policymakers, ethicists, everyday people, all involved in the conversation. This isn't sci-fi anymore. It's something we actually have to be ready for.
Well said. And on that note of cautious optimism, I think we're going to have to wrap up this deep dive. It's been quite a ride going from this old CIA report to, well, the fate of the planet, basically.
It just goes to show you never know where you're going to find these big questions. Sometimes it's in the most unexpected places.
That's the truth. Big thanks to you, as always, for helping us unpack all of this. It's been fascinating and more than a little scary, to be honest. And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, stay curious and maybe keep an eye on the weather forecast.